Can we get started now?
What did we do?
Come on.
Oh, what have I done?
We got a show to record.
Oh, jeez, there's nothing I'm allowed to do. Bossy, bossy, bossy.
Thank you so much for being my first guest on this new season of Ask Firebase. And I brought you here specifically because you answer more questions than anybody else I know on Stack Overflow.
Yeah, I do my fair share indeed, yeah.
Yeah, when I first started trying to get my score up and answer some questions, it's a challenge. I had to find the hours where you are sleeping so I can get some points. I'll be like typing and it'll be like, someone has already answered this. I'll refresh and there you are. Your finger is to the pulse of Firebase and the questions that people have. Now, because this is Ask Firebase, I'm going to start by asking you a question that I have, which is, how did you end up being part of the Firebase team?
I started out actually when Firebase was in beta for the first time, and I started out as a user of Firebase, as a developer using Firebase. And then on Stack Overflow found that other developers had questions about how to use Firebase. So in my weekends, I started answering those questions. I remember very proudly the first time that one of the Firebase team members actually complimented me on one of my answers, saying, "That's a great answer, Frank." I was like, whoa, very nice. And one thing led to another. I kept answering questions, and then a year later they reached out to me and asked if I wanted to join the team and become a Firebaser. And I still answer a lot of questions on Stack Overflow.
I mean, that's a remarkable story. I think that what we really want in order to be able to answer your questions is, talk a little bit about how to ask great questions. So, you really increase your chances of getting your question answered.
I often explain that the best way to ensure that you get help is to make it easy for us to help you, not just me, but everyone who's helping people on Stack Overflow. And that is a few basic rules that you want to normally follow. One of them for me is always like, you have to describe what the problem is that you have, right? So what's the behavior that you see? What did you expect to see, right? So I see A, I expected B. Sometimes I also want to know why you think what you expected to see is better, but let's ignore that and we'll cut that. Mostly it's like, what did you see? What did you expect to see? Very important there is to also show the code that reproduces what you saw. It could be, most often it's code when it's on Stack Overflow because it's a programming site, but it could also be the steps to reproduce. Like I clicked on this button in the console and something happened that I did not expect, right? When it comes to code, very important to give us a small snippet of the code.
That is definitely a challenge. I remember when I was getting my nano degree from Udacity and I'd have questions, my first inclination was just like, here's the link to my GitHub repo.
Yeah,
have at it.
Yeah.
So figuring out the minimal code to show to get your question answered can take some practice.
No, for sure. Yeah, it's a very common problem actually, right? Because you probably as a developer, when you are reaching out to Stack Overflow, right, you have been trying to solve this problem for a bit already, and you've been stuck at it, so you're probably frustrated and you've spent time on it already. But realize that the person you're asking for help has not. They haven't suffered along with you. And right, the easier you make it for them to help you, the more likely you are to get help. So take a few steps back from the problem where you are stuck and try to reproduce actually the problem in a minimal amount of code. So if you have the time and really consider if you shouldn't make the time, do file a new project and recreate just the problem in the minimal amount of code. And this is what is called in Stack Overflow an MCVE, a minimal complete verifiable example. And it means that it must be both minimal and complete. Right? So don't just take 5 lines from your entire program and say, here's the crux of it, because most likely that's not where the problem is. The problem is most likely in this bit before and after it.
Oh yeah, when it comes to the questions that I love to answer on Stack Overflow, if we're talking specifically about, let's say iOS, because that's definitely my jam, I love when I can just put it into a playground. If I can take your code and put it into a playground and run it, that's going to make it much easier for me to help out.
Yeah, I do a lot of JavaScript, so JSBin is my playground. And I just today copied some code from a Stack Overflow question into a JSBin, and I was just playing with it actually as we came into the studio. So I hope to figure that one out later today.
Nice.
But, yeah.
Okay, so far we have that we want to have what happened and what you expected to happen, and the minimal steps or code to reproduce it.
Yeah. Do you know of other things that you like seeing in questions?
I like to see a question mark.
Oh, good one.
I know that sounds silly, but sometimes I'll get to the end of something and realize that I'm not sure what the question is.
Yeah.
So, sometimes if I'm asking a question, I want to make sure that I get to the end and I'm like, if someone looked at this really quickly, would they know what I was asking? So if you have a question mark, then you're on the right track to having a question.
No, that's actually a really good one. We see this quite often. And on Stack Overflow, right, your question might get closed sometimes. And one of the reasons is it's unclear what you're asking. And a fairly common reason for that is because there is not really a question in there. Or maybe there are 20 questions in there. And it's like, we can't really answer 20 questions efficiently. Mm-hmm. So try to indeed make sure that the question is clear and that it's a limited scope of question. And especially the title or the subject of your question is really important for that. One of the things I sometimes see is that people almost use it for tagging the question. It's like it's Android Studio, it's Oreo, it's Firebase database, and real-time updates. Like, that's not a title. That's a list of tags, right? And we have a tagging system for that. So all good, but move that into the tags. Now write a question into the first bar that you see.
Oh yeah, so that's it. Yeah, if your title is a question, then I guess you're off to a good start. When it comes specifically to Ask Firebase, the kind of questions that I love to answer are, ones that we can do mostly visually. So something like, how would I use this product in this setting? Or is it possible to do something?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For me, some of my personal favorites are, how does something work, right? I don't understand. Because I actually often, when the question comes in, don't know how it works. And then I get to dive into the code or talk to the engineers and get the answer from them. So I learn a lot from those questions.
I love that our developers are so excited to know when the next products are coming out. We do get a lot of those questions, but they are not going to get answered.
No timelines, no commitments is a fairly unfortunate but standard answer.
So certainly sometimes there are questions that go beyond the realm of something you'd want to put on Stack Overflow or maybe be answered on Ask Firebase. For sure. How do we know if something belongs to support? We'll put a link below as well so you can find out how to access that.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I often say that not every problem is a good question for Stack Overflow, right? And some of those are things like, suddenly your app stops working with Firebase and you see all kinds of error messages and you didn't change really anything. You didn't deploy a new version. Yeah, chances that this is really related to your code are small, right? So it's better to actually first check the Firebase status page to see if there's a known outage. And if there isn't, reach out to Firebase support because they might know more of what is going on. And they can also dive deeper into seeing what for your specific project might be going on there.
Yeah, that's a really valid point. So if something was working and suddenly it's not, that would be a good time to escalate it to support.
They will, of course, still ask you to create one of those minimal, complete, verifiable examples that reproduces it. But that's mostly once they figured out that there is no outage going on. But just reach out if you're uncertain about something like that, because your app being down is something that we definitely want to take seriously, and it's not something that's well served on a site like Stack Overflow.
Or what about maybe if there is a big change in the usage of your app, even though you didn't change anything? So maybe you had a function that was only running a couple times, but now it seems to be running like a whole lot more. Might that be something you'd want to escalate as well?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we actually see those regularly, right? Where indeed there's a sudden spike in usage, and as a developer you can't explain it. Now, first start asking around, because what we see quite often is that it's one of the other developers on your team that might suddenly be running an administrative process every night, right? That could be. But if you can't find it, reach out to Firebase support because they can see the statistics of your project on a more broader level. And so they might see, it's like, we see this happening since that date and it happens every 4 hours. That typically points to a backend process on your side most likely, but it's still something that we can help you find. So these are things that Stack Overflow is not going to be helpful for you because the people on Stack Overflow, right, the other developers that you're asking for help don't have that information.
Right, they can't access your app that way.
So you might still end up with Jen and me essentially, but it will be something that is purely focused on helping you troubleshoot your project instead of helping you with a programming problem that anyone might encounter.
Great. Great. Well, thanks so much for coming on. I couldn't think of a better person to come talk about asking great questions.
Yeah, for sure. And keep in mind that right now that you know how you can ask a better question on Stack Overflow, that means that you're going to be asking a better question next time. That also means that we can help more people on Stack Overflow use Firebase. And that's what we're all here for. And remember, you don't just have to ask questions. If you know the answer to a question, be sure to answer it, because who knows, you might be the next person answering questions on Ask Firebase.
Bye. Oh.